Hello，你好，欢迎回来。Welcome back to Wisdom Wednesday with Johnny Tiger on March uh, 10th, 2021. If I sound a little bit nasal today, that is because it is March, and what always comes with March for those of us who are a little bit sensitive, with sensitive sinuses, is the seasonal allergy is starting to kick in. And honestly, as soon as I got up this morning, I got out of bed and I immediately sneezed like 9 times non-stop. And no, I do not have COVID-19. It's just a regular sinus allergic reaction to whatever that is in the air. Uh, I know because I know the symptoms by now. I've been lived with this my whole life. Happen every time the season change and there's pollens and all that kind of stuff floating around in the air. My eyes start to tear up, my sinus feel swollen, and my nose just runs like someone just turned on the tap, and I can't seem to stop sneezing. So, with that said, it would be a little bit stressful if every time I sneeze or have to clear my sinus, I have to restart the video. I'm going to try to cut it down and not let it happen. But if I do have to sneeze or do something unsightly, I will just go off screen, go off frame, and come back after I get it under control. And hopefully, you guys will forgive this little bit of unprofessionalism. Is that even a word? Unprofessionalism? I don't know. Anyway, okay. So Wisdom Wednesday. A while ago, I was chatting with one of my friends, and for one reason or another, the topic got onto what we like to have for breakfast, or milk, coffee, juice, and I mentioned I really like soy milk. And this friend, who's as white as Wonder Bread, uh, not it's not meant to be racist or anything, but it's important to clarify that. Uh, Immediately started in on how soy milk is bad for you and how it messes with your hormone and how it makes you unable to have children and might give you breast cancer and so on and so on and so on. Now, I'm not here to contradict or affirm any scientific evidence because we can find scientific evidence on both sides of the fence when it comes to soy products. I'm not here to debate that, but I do personally find that his rhetoric with regarding to soy milk both kind of funny, ironic, and offensive at the same time. Why? This is my thought on the whole topic of soy milk and soy product in general. As a Chinese person, as a Taiwanese person, if we want to be specific, as a Taiwanese person born and bred and raised partway in Taiwan in a traditional Chinese Taiwanese family, I grew up on a lot of soy products. Okay, Chinese people have been using soy products for 3,000 years. As far back as 3,000 years ago, when they first started learning how to grow soybeans and started eating it and using it in different ways. For 3,000 years, my people have been using soy products, and we still manage to uh, overpopulate the world. And depending on who you talk to, China still managed to become the second most powerful country in the world with the largest population in the whole world. So if you want to tell me that soy product is bad for your hormone, it's going to make you unable to have children, Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't know what the scientists, where they get their data from, where they get their information from, who fund those information, who fund those research. But uh, if you look at historical fact, if you look at reality, it doesn't seem to have that effect on Chinese people at all. And they want to talk about soy milk is bad for you and you can do this and do that to your hormone and blah blah blah. I grew up without milk. Well, I mean, not counting my mother's milk when I was an infant. Actually, I didn't even have that. My mother didn't breastfeed me. I was weaned on uh, uh, powdered stuff, the formula. But okay, not counting that. Uh, but when after I stopped needing formula, I drank soy milk every morning when I was growing up. And if I may say so myself, I'm pretty fit, pretty strong, pretty healthy for the most part, and there's nothing the matter with me, physically, mentally, emotionally, sexually, whatever. And I'm almost 40 years old. My father grew up on soy milk. My father does not drink milk. Even to this day, he likes his soy milk every morning. He is 80 years old, still strong as an ox, and all considering, it's pretty healthy, and he is even still sexually active. Nothing the matter with his hormone. Nothing the matter with him. Well, other than having dementia in the head, but that's a different kind of illness. So, all evidence that I have personally experienced, I have personally seen through my people's history, point toward that soy milk, soy product is not necessarily not maybe it's not bad for you. Maybe there's nothing wrong with it. Now, some people will say, well, yeah, but the kind of stuff they grow today, they use this, they use that. Well, then that's not the problem with the soy milk. That's the problem with how people might be growing them here in North America. Then that's easy. Buy the Chinese brand. Buy the stuff that made over there. Because people are still using it over there, and nothing's the matter with them. No scientist out of Taiwan or China saying soy milk is bad, soy sauce is bad. I'm just saying that as a point of reference, both to lead into our topic for today, and also just to put to rest any kind of uh, nagging concern some of you may have. Maybe you're like me. Maybe you like soy milk. Maybe you're like me. You like tofu. Maybe you're like me. You like soy sauce. And then some of your North American or UK friends start whispering in your ear of how it's doing something evil to you, and you're going to unable to have kids, and you're going to end up with breast cancer and so on. And now you're so scared, you don't want to have your soy product anymore. I'm just giving you my perspective, and maybe what people are talking about is not necessarily true when you look at the historical evidence and the evidence presented by Chinese and Taiwanese and Malaysian other Asian populations. Let's start with soy milk. I love soy milk, and for the most part, soy milk is not as uh, strictly as what we see here in North America. Here, when you walk into a supermarket, you get sweetened soy milk, unsweetened soy milk, and then soy milk with vanilla flavor and chocolate flavor. Those are just disgusting. I'm not even going to discuss those. Those are not invention of my people. Those are not how soy milk were meant to be had. But hey, if that's your thing, then all the more power to you. If you like that stuff. In Taiwan and China, soy milk are enjoyed in much wider variety. There's You can have your soy milk cold, and you can have your soy milk warm, and you can have the soy milk in its original flavor, which really doesn't have much of any flavor. Uh, you can have soy milk with a little bit of sugar uh, or honey. That's a sweetened variety. You can have salty soy milk. Because don't forget, soy milk in its original form doesn't have hardly any taste to it. So if you want to make it sweet, it can be sweet. If you want to make it salty, it can be salty. And there are a lot of people who enjoy salty soy milk, and it's just kind of like a broth. And they'll put some soy sauce and green onion and chive and meat and stuff like that in it to make it like a soup. In Beijing, in China, people also have this different form of soy milk that is kind of a really sour taste. They drink the sour soy milk. So you can equate that to like some people like the more sour kind of like sour cream and yogurt, that kind of taste for dairy product. Well, there's the equivalent for that in soy milk in Beijing, China. People there like that. I personally can't stand it, so I like my soy milk just the regular way with sweetened. Uh, that's how I always had it. Soy milk in, in Mandarin it's called 豆浆, Dojing, 豆浆, 豆浆. Roughly translated, bean juice. Bean juice. That doesn't really sound very appetizing. So, how did bean juice or doujiang or soy milk, how did it first become a thing? Here in North America, soy milk didn't become a thing until 1917. It wasn't until 1910 when the world's first official soy milk factory was opened by a Chinese guy in France. And it wasn't until 1912 when he patented it, the right to soy milk. And it wasn't until 1917 when soy milk came to North America to New York. So there again, I mean, soy milk has been in the North American or white culture for just over 100 years. Comparing that to Chinese people who've been using it for 3,000 years, now people want to say that they know more about what's good for you, what's bad for you in soy products than Chinese people do. I don't think so. I think 3,000 years we pretty much know how it works, what it does, what it doesn't do, so on and so on. Anyway, that's kind of digressing a little bit. So how did soy milk first started in China? Well, the the story goes that about 2,500 years ago, there was this very scholarly, very virtuous person, very virtuous guy who was very devoted to his mom. He was very uh, kind, very obedience to his mom. And that was one of the greatest virtue in Chinese history. Is you need to be 孝顺 to your parents. 孝顺 means the law of obedient filial piety. Um, so it encompasses a lot of things. We'll come back and talk about that in the future episode. But basically, this guy was one of the biggest 孝 person, the one of the greatest most virtuous person in being kind, being nice to his mom. Back then, they actually give you award. Like if a lot of people nominate you to be very 孝顺, you can actually get an imperial award from the emperor himself. And having that award in your home would entitle you to all kind of perks. Even the local government have to be nice to you. if you have such an award from the imperial court. So this guy's mom became really sick, and the doctor said that she has to eat soybean because of some property in soybean that could make her feel better. But soybean was kind of hard to digest. You know, you just if you just feed her soybean, she was old, she didn't have a lot of teeth, and she had a hard time chewing. So this guy would buy a lot of soybean, and he would soak them in water until it get all mushy and dissolving, and he would take a big uh, pestle and mortar, big grinder, and he would grind the whole thing down and filter it so the pulp and all the more solid stuff get filtered out of the liquid. And he would take that liquid and boil it and serve it to his mom because the liquid would still have all the properties of soybean in it. And all she had to do was drink it. So that was like the world's first protein shake, the world's first uh, power shake. And then, of course, the mom would complain, no, this doesn't have any taste to it, and then he would add different things to it, try different ingredients, try with sugar, with honey, with salt, and that was how the world, the Chinese people at least, first came up with the concept of soy milk. And then gradually, people decided, well, you know, all this pulp and all this other stuff that gets thrown out, that's kind of wasteful. Maybe we can find a way to use it. So what they do is they let that they shape that pulp, all those solid stuff into one lump, and then they shape them into a big square, big chunk, and then they let it sit there, and it get moldy, it ferment, and then they add other things to it, and they turn that into tofu, and that is how tofu came to be. It's all the leftover uh, gunk, pulp uh, stuff from making soy milk. Now I can talk about tofu all day. Tofu is one of my favorite food items. But let me clarify this. When I say tofu, I don't mean the like when people talk about tofu burger or tofu hot dog or tofu tuna, that kind of stuff. Okay, that's to me that's not tofu. It's the same kind of it's the same thing. Uh, uh, it's the same thing, but it's not the tofu that I grew up with. It's not tofu to Chinese people. That's processed stuff. That's uh, so if you want to if you ask what's the difference, it's still tofu. Well, it's still soy product. What's the difference? Well, let me give you this example then. Um, Imagine that you say to me you love seafood, you love seafood, you love your lobster, you love your salmon, you love your tuna steak, and then I offer you a can of sardine and say, that's seafood. Yeah, it technically is seafood, but at the same time, it's probably not what you had in mind when you said you love seafood. So tofu to Chinese people, it's not the same as tofu to a lot of non-Chinese populations when they talk about uh, soy burger, soy hot dog, that kind of stuff. When we talk about tofu, Chinese people, it's that block like a uh, brick size square, nice and soft, very creamy, very uh, kind of white for the most part. It can be different color too, depending on how you make it. But you know, it's soft, it dissolved in your mouth, and it just uh, takes on the flavor of whatever you cook it in. That's tofu. That's what we talk about when we talk about tofu. In Mandarin, tofu. It's tofu, Dofu. So as you can see, in English word, all they did was change the first letter uh, from D to T. I don't know why they did that, but anyway, tofu. What it means is, well, you guys, some of you already know this, bean curd, bean curd. That's what it is, tofu. Right now, in the world, the one country that has the biggest tofu culture is actually Japan. Japanese people love tofu. Japanese people love tofu so much that they have special restaurants uh, devoted to the art of tofu. When you go to Japan, you can actually find these restaurants that serve nothing but tofu in them. And you go there, you get so many different varieties of tofu dishes. Um, and there's two most popular way, a very specific way of preparing tofu in Japan. One is in the summertime when the weather is hot, they serve you cold tofu. And how this is done is they take a piece of fresh tofu and just run it under boiled water quickly, and then fish it out, let it cool, and then they cut it up into small mahjong block uh, size blocks, and then they serve it on ice cube. When they bring it to your table, they have this ice cube and with these tofu pieces and on a very nice looking plate. And then on the side, they have a dish with soy sauce, with uh, green onion and other ingredients, ginger and wasabi in it. And then you take these uh, pretty fresh pieces of tofu, nice and cold, dip in the soy sauce dish, and you eat it like that. It's delicious. It's like one of the uh, best way to enjoy your tofu. Now, if you want to do that, you need absolutely fresh tofu. Okay, you can't just go to a supermarket and buy a packaged tofu and do. I mean, you can, but it's not going to taste the same. These tofu have to be freshly made. Freshly made. In the wintertime, of course, it's too cold to eat this cold tofu, so they change it up to a different way of doing it. They take a small pot, a small clay pot, and they fill that clay pot with mountain spring water. It has to be mountain spring water. I don't know why. It's more pure or something. Personally, I can't really tell the difference. But I'm a little bit of a barbarian that way. I don't really have a very refined taste. But if you want to do this uh, the proper way, then you have to fill the clay pot with mountain spring water, and then again you take a piece of tofu, you put it in there, and then you bring the whole thing to a boil, and then right as it starts to boil, you take it off the fire and then bring it to the table. You fish out that piece of tofu and cut it into square pieces, mahjong block size pieces, about an inch piece, an inch square. And again, on the side, you have a dish with soy sauce, wasabi, green onion, ginger, all that stuff, and then you dip this freshly boiled tofu in it, and you eat it. And then afterward, after you finish eating your tofu, you take the rest of your sauce and pour it into the still hot broth that you just boiled your tofu in, and then you drink that like a soup. You eat that like a soup. That's the two most common way for Japanese people to eat and serve tofu. Tofu is also so important to Japanese people that if you ever go to Japan, you go to a Japanese Buddhist monastery for a tour. If the monk invite you to stay for a tofu meal, That is offering you the highest level of respect. If they offer you to, if you ask, would you like to stay? We're going to have tofu. Then that's the monks extending you the highest level of respect. But with that said, Japanese people did not invent tofu. Again, Chinese people did, of course. And how it got over to Japan was about 1200 years ago during the Tang Dynasty. There was a very respected, highly respected Buddhist monk who traveled from China all the way to India on foot to bring Buddhism and more Buddhist Bible back to Chinese people. This story was dramatized, romanticized in one of the greatest Chinese novels called The Journey West. Some of you might know this story, so I'm not going to go into that because if I go into The Journey West, we'll be here all day. So anyway, uh, on the way to uh, India, this monk also detoured to Japan. Uh, that's a real account, not in the Journey West story. They did in the Journey West. They didn't talk about Japan, but in the real journey, he detoured over to Japan, and he brought to Japanese people the Chinese people's way of making soy sauce, Chinese people's way of making tofu, and it stuck ever since. Japanese people just love that stuff. For the longest time, Japanese people uh, address themselves as the culture of soy, the culture of soy sauce. Even when I was little, my uh, nanny Maru would take me to the Buddhist temple for uh, pilgrimage, and these pilgrimages were really hard work. It's like you start like let's say the temple is at the top of the mountain. The tour bus drop you off at the foot of the mountain, and from that point on, you have to hike up the mountain in like 40 degrees Celsius weather, and it's not just a regular hike because to pay respect to the Buddha, to uh, to do your pilgrimage, you have to get down on your knee and pray and bow every 3 steps. So you can imagine how tedious that was. You walk 1, 2, 3 steps, you get down on your knee, you bow, you pray, you say your prayer, you get up, walk 3 more steps, you get down, and you got to do that all the way until you get to the monastery. So why did we do that? Well, because some of us we were very devoted Buddhists, but a lot of people did it because they uh, enjoy the feast they get when they get to the monastery. When you do this pilgrimage, they always have a feast ready for you at the top of the mountain, and almost every dish has some kind of soy product, tofu in it, because of course there were Buddhist monks, they were all vegetarian, so they were masters at using tofu in their dishes. They were masters at preparing tofu. They could do things with tofu that people wouldn't know about. There's no recipe. There's no one teaching how to make tofu so delicious that as a monk, a Buddhist monk could. So a lot of us went on these pilgrimages, getting tortured all the way up the mountain just for that Buddhist feast. In some Chinese restaurants today, you can still find a dish on the menu called the Buddhist Feast. And if it's a good Chinese restaurant, I really recommend you try it, even when you are not vegetarian. I recommend you try it at least once because Buddhist Feast is great dish. It's just so nutritious, so tasty, and just one of the best dishes I've ever had. Um, I'm not even vegetarian. I'm like a true carnivore. I love meat. I love a lot of meat, but I love the Buddhist feast. I love tofu. Tofu has been such a big part of Chinese culture that there's even a slang, a quote that is patterned after tofu. When people say 吃豆腐, Chedofu, 吃豆腐, it's the act of flirting. It's the act of, well, almost sexual harassment, actually. Um, so when you are flirting with someone and the person may make a comment like, "How come you are 吃豆腐? Why you 吃 my 豆腐? Why you eat my tofu? Means why are you flirting with me? Why are you getting fresh? Why are you sexually harassing me? Uh, uh, Sexual harassment has such a bad connotation, but 吃豆腐 is more playful. It's more casual. It's closer to flirting than sexual harassment. However, sometimes uh, when people complain about someone, they'll also say that if your wife come home and say, I hate that guy at work, George at work, he always eat my tofu, then that's something you need to address because that means George at work is getting fresh with your wife. Okay, so how did the 吃豆腐 slang came about? How did tofu get mixed in with sexual advances? Um, the story goes that about 800 years ago, there was a female tofu seller in China, and in her city, apparently people in her city didn't like tofu very much. So all the people that made tofu, all the people that sold tofu, didn't do very good business. But this lady, she did fantastic business. She Almost everyone in the city would come to her bright and early in the morning just to buy her tofu, just to try her tofu. And even people from out of town would come to try her tofu, not because her tofu tasted better than anyone else, but because she was very seductive, very sexy, very beautiful. So they called this woman 豆腐西施. 豆腐西施means the tofu beauty. Tofu beauty. So tofu beauty became very famous throughout China. Even the people from the imperial court, even the emperor himself, came to try her tofu just so they can see her in person. So from that point on, a lot of women became very jealous of tofu beauty, and whenever their men want to have tofu for dinner, the women would get mad and get jealous and say, you just want tofu beauty's tofu, right? You tell me you want tofu, so, but you just want to eat her tofu, right? So from that point on, eating someone's tofu became a kind of a flirtatious sexual connotation in among Chinese people. Now we talked about soy milk and tofu, and of course we can't neglect the third item out of this soy family that is probably the most widely used in China and widely used throughout the world. And if you guessed soy sauce, then you're right. A lot of Chinese people like to say we are a rice people, we are rice babies. I say nay nay. I say because there's a lot of Chinese people, especially northern Chinese people, that don't eat rice. They like to eat noodles. They like to eat bread. They like to eat wheat product. So not everyone in Chinese culture eat rice, but everyone in Chinese culture eat soy sauce uh, at one point of their life or the other. So it would be a little bit more accurate to say that we are the true soy sauce baby. Because no matter if you like bread or noodle or rice noodle or rice uh, in Chinese culture, you need soy sauce. When I was little, there are a lot of people that couldn't afford meat, couldn't afford vegetables every day, and they all they do was they would boil noodle or they would cook rice and they put a little bit of soy sauce over the whole thing and they would eat it like that. That's their regular day-to-day meal. Uh, a lot of time, you see that with the older population in China, they will go to uh, a pub, and let's say they only have money for uh, alcohol. They don't want to spend the money for food, but they want to have something to uh, eat or suck on while they're drinking. They'll get a dish of soy sauce, and then they'll get they have these little tiny, very porous rock, almost like soapstone, and they take these little chunks of rock, they put it in a dish of soy sauce, and every time they feel like they want some flavor in their mouth, they take these little chunks of rock, put it under their tongue for a little bit, and then they continue to drink, uh, and then put that back in the soy sauce. That's how they substitute having to spend money to buy food while you're drinking. So soy sauce is such a big culture with Chinese people. Soy sauce is so important to Chinese people that back in the 1960s, when almost everything in China was regulated, if you wanted to buy rice, you needed to have rice meal vouchers. If you wanted to buy chocolate, you needed to have meal vouchers specifically for chocolate. If you wanted to buy ice cream, you needed to have meal vouchers specifically for ice cream. Only three items didn't require meal voucher. As long as you could afford it, you could buy it anytime you wanted. One was soy sauce, one was vinegar, one was rice wine. So those were the only three items so important to Chinese people that they didn't have to regulate them. Before we go today, I'm going to give you. Oh, actually, I almost forgot. Soy sauce in Mandarin is called 酱油. 酱油 means salty sauce. Um, however, in my native Taiwanese dialect, it's called 导游, 导游, which means bean sauce. Because again, made from soybean. Before I go today, I want to talk about two of the most famous uh, Chinese dishes that utilize soy sauce and that illustrates how soy sauce has been the same in China for thousands of years. The first of these uh, dishes came from southern China and called Yangdu. Yangdu. The Yangdu dish has been recorded in Chinese historical record for as far back as 1500 years. And how it is made is you take the most fresh bamboo shoots you can find, cut it up into little chunks, and you take uh, some uh, bean sprout, and then you cut it up into small sections. You take the bean sprout, you take the bamboo shoot, you put them in a big bowl, and then you run some boiled water over them. Don't overcook them. You just want to boil them briefly, like maybe 30 seconds, if that, just to take away any kind of bacteria, any kind of dirt, grassy smell that might be on them. And then you take that, uh, let them dry, pat them dry with a paper towel, and then you put them in a steamer, and then you lay some fresh pieces of fish, some fresh shrimp over them, and then you steam the whole thing until your seafood is done. And then after you steam this whole thing, you pour soy sauce over it, and then you can serve it over rice or noodle. That's a yangdu. Uh, People from different province make it a little bit differently, but the way I just told you is the most traditional, the most original. The second very popular soy sauce dish out of China was it's called the soy sauce meat. The soy sauce meat, and how this is made, it's a little bit like curing bacon. Uh, Back in the old days, again, we're talking about 800, 900 years ago, uh, people would buy a big piece of pork in December at the coldest time of the year, and they would get the bone out of this piece of pork, trim away the fat, and then they will boil a big pot of soy sauce. Okay, they'll boil a big pot of soy sauce, and then they put this chunk of freshly deboned, freshly trimmed piece of meat in the soy sauce and let it marinate in the soy sauce for 4 days, 4 nights. After 4 days and 4 nights, they fish it out of the soy sauce and hang it in their barn. And because the weather is so cold that it wasn't going to get any flies or any bugs or stuff like that, they will hang that piece of meat in the barn for uh, the next 2 or 3 months. And when spring came around, you will see this meat has turned the same color as the soy sauce. It's all really tan, really dark, and kind of dry. And then they'll take this piece of cured meat and dice it up, and they will put it in a steamer with fresh bamboo shoots and some other vegetable, and they will either use it to steam it and serve it over noodle or rice, or put it in soup. And this is the soy sauce meat. Even today in China, it's one of the very, very popular, very authentic, traditional Chinese dishes. Like I said, if I want to continue to talk about tofu, soy milk, soy sauce, we can go on and on all day. There's just so much to say. I love all three items. I love my soy milk. I definitely have to have soy sauce in my dishes, and I just love tofu. So perhaps now, after all that, you can see why I was so offended and find that my friends' comments about the harmful effect of soy product, uh, why I found it so offensive. Anyway, thanks for checking out today's Wisdom Wednesday. We actually made it through without having to sneeze or anything. Uh, we'll be back again tomorrow for Toy Thursday. For now, have a good night and 再见。